It all started with laundry, that most mundane of tasks. I was in the laundry room of our Upper West Side brownstone, folding clothes, my mind a blank canvas as I sorted through the basket. Socks, t-shirts, the usual suspects. Then Liam walked in. He'd just finished his morning run in Central Park, his dark hair still damp, earbuds swinging from his neck like rogue vines. "Need a hand?" he asked, casual, reaching for a water bottle on the counter. I glanced at him, surprised. "Help with laundry? That's a first." He chuckled, leaning against the doorframe, all lean muscle and easy charm. Trying to be useful around here. Shocking, I know. "Be my guest," I said, gesturing to the overflowing basket. "But don't come crying to me when you're knee-deep in mismatched socks." Liam stepped forward, a grin playing on his lips, grabbing a handful of clothes. For a few minutes we worked in comfortable silence, the dryer's low hum filling the small space. And then it happened. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him still. His hand hovered over something in the basket. "What's this?" he asked, holding up a piece of silk and lace. My stomach dropped like a stone. It was one of my bras, a delicate thing, undeniably intimate. I reached for it, a reflex, but he held it just out of reach, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Didn't know you wore stuff like this, Ava," he said, his tone teasing, but with an undercurrent I couldn't quite place. "It's none of your business," I snapped, snatching it from his fingers and shoving it back into the basket, burying it under a pile of towels. "Sorry," he said quickly, but his eyes lingered on me, a flicker of something unreadable passing across his face. For a heartbeat, the air in the laundry room thickened, charged with an energy that prickled my skin. I turned away, focusing on the mundane task of folding, but I could feel his gaze on me, the tension in the room a palpable thing. "Thanks for the help," I said finally, my voice tighter than I intended. "I've got it from here." Liam hesitated, then nodded. "Right, sure. See you later." As he left, I let out a shaky breath, my mind suddenly a whirlwind. It was just laundry. Just a clumsy moment. That's what I tried to tell myself. But the image of Liam's face in the laundry room kept replaying in my mind. It wasn't just the teasing smirk, or the way his eyes had lingered a fraction too long. It was the shift in the air, the sudden charge in a space that should have been utterly neutral. A simple, forgettable interaction, and yet it felt different, charged. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. He was just being playful, maybe a little cheeky, but that was Liam. I'd known him since he was a skinny kid with braces, always lurking in the background at family dinners, shy and quiet. But now, at 24, he was taller, broader, and carried himself with a quiet confidence that was new, or maybe just new to my conscious awareness. Liam had moved back in about 2 months ago, after college. He'd landed an internship at the game development company where I was a senior creative director. Mark, my husband, Liam's father, had suggested he stay with us while he found his feet. Mark and I had been married for 5 years. He was a good man, solid, dependable, endlessly practical. But his work as a financial advisor kept him constantly traveling, and even when he was home, it felt more like we were roommates than partners. I told myself it didn't bother me. At 55, I'd long accepted that passion. That spark wasn't something I could expect anymore. Not in my marriage. Not anywhere. And then Liam walked into the laundry room that day, and suddenly, everything felt complicated. It started subtly. At dinner, I'd catch him glancing at me when he thought I wasn't looking. It wasn't the casual, indifferent look of a stepson towards a stepmother. It was something else. Then there were the snatched conversations. "Work keeping you crazy?" he asked one evening as we cleared the dinner table, a shared mundane task. "Always," I replied, stacking plates in the dishwasher. "Deadlines wait for no one." He leaned against the counter, watching me. "You seem like you've got it all figured out. The way everyone at the office talks about you, it's like you're some kind of superhero." I laughed, shaking my head. "Hardly." "I would," he said, his voice suddenly softer. I glanced up, caught off guard by the sincerity in his tone. His eyes held mine for a moment, and that same unspoken tension from the laundry room flickered back to life. I quickly looked away, focusing on the dishes. "You're sweet, Liam." A week later, Mark left for another business trip. The brownstone felt cavernous, quiet. Liam and I were both working late, me in my home office, him at the dining room table, his laptop open in front of him. Around 9, I wandered into the living room, needing a break from spreadsheets and design briefs. Liam was on the couch, laptop still open, but his attention drifted to the muted TV. Calling it a night? He asked, looking up. Not quite, I said, sinking into the armchair across from him. Just needed to step away for a minute. He closed his laptop, leaning back against the cushions. You work too hard, you know. Comes with the territory, I shrugged. He smiled faintly. You're always so composed, like nothing ever gets to you. It's impressive. I let out a soft laugh. Trust me, I'm far from perfect. I don't believe that, he said, his gaze steady. The way he was looking at me made my heart skip a beat, but I forced myself to maintain composure. You're flattering me again. He shook his head. I mean it. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at me. It wasn't just admiration. It was something deeper, something that made me feel exposed in a way I hadn't felt in years. I told myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking everything. But the next morning, when I caught him watching me from across the kitchen island, lingering just a second too long as I poured my coffee, I knew I wasn't imagining it. The breaking point came a few days later, Friday night, late. I was in the living room, buried in notes for a new campaign. Liam walked in, 2 mugs of tea in his hands. Long night, he asked, settling on the couch. Always, I said, glancing up. He placed a mug on the coffee table in front of me, then leaned back, his eyes fixed on me. You work harder than anyone I know. It's what the job demands, I replied, though I couldn't help but smile at the compliment. He hesitated, then said, You make it look easy, the way you handle everything. Work, this house, even Dad, you're incredible. His words caught me off guard, and a warmth bloomed in my chest. Liam, I'm serious, Ava, he said, his voice soft. You don't give yourself enough credit. The room felt suddenly small, the air thick. He was sitting closer than I'd realized, his knee almost brushing mine. I should have stood up, should have walked away. But I stayed frozen, my heart pounding against my ribs as his hand lightly touched mine. Liam, I said, my voice trembling. I'm sorry, he said quickly, pulling his hand back. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. You didn't, I blurted out before I could stop myself. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The tension between us was a live wire, an unspoken understanding passing between us like a shock. I should go to bed, I said finally, standing abruptly. Yeah, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But as I walked towards the stairs, I felt his eyes on my back, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that this was far from over. The night after that moment in the living room, sleep was a distant dream. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene in my mind. The way Liam looked at me, the subtle tremor in his voice. It all felt so intense, so wrong. And yet, beneath the guilt, a forbidden pull tugged at me. My thoughts were a tangled mess of confusion and a yearning I hadn't felt in decades. When I finally drifted off, it was a restless sleep, punctuated by the same gnawing unease that had settled in my stomach. The tension between us only intensified in the days that followed. Liam and I danced around each other, a silent agreement that distance was the only way to make things manageable. But the brownstone wasn't that big. Avoidance was a flimsy shield. Then, one evening, Mark called to say his business trip was extended again. Not surprising. His work always seemed to stretch out longer than planned. But this time, the news sent a ripple of panic through me. With Mark gone, the silence in the house became deafening, amplifying the unspoken thing between Liam and me. Every accidental brush of hands, every shared glance felt like a spark near dry tinder. It all detonated one Friday night. I was at the dining room table, buried in project notes again, when Liam walked in, holding 2 glasses of wine. You look like you could use this, he said, placing a glass in front of me. I looked up, startled. You didn't have to. Consider it a thank you for putting up with me living here, he said with a small smile, settling down across from me. Liam, you don't need to thank me, I said, taking a sip of the wine. This is your home too. He leaned back in his chair, studying me. You're always so kind. Even when you're carrying the weight of the world, you never let it show. I laughed softly, shaking my head. You're giving me way too much credit. I don't think I am, he said, his gaze unwavering. The room felt impossibly still. The air crackled with something I couldn't name. I set my glass down, my heart pounding in my chest. Liam, I began, but he interrupted me. I know what you're going to say, he said, his voice low. And you're right, this shouldn't feel like this. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. It doesn't matter how it feels. It's wrong. Then why can't I stop thinking about you? He asked, his voice trembling. "Why does it feel like you're the only person who sees me, really sees me for who I am?" His words hit me like a physical blow. My carefully constructed wall of resolve crumbled. "Liam, I choked out, but before I could finish, he reached across the table, his hand covering mine. The warmth of his touch sent a jolt through me, and I couldn't bring myself to pull away. "You don't have to say anything," he whispered, and then he leaned forward, his lips brushing against mine. The kiss was hesitant at first, tentative, as if he was waiting for me to push him away, but when I didn't, it deepened, his hand sliding up to cup my cheek, pulling me closer. I should have stopped it. I should have stood up, walked away, but instead I found myself leaning into him, my hands gripping the edge of the table, my body betraying every rational thought in my head. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. "This can't happen," I gasped, my voice trembling. "I know," he said quietly, "but it already has." That night was the beginning of something irreversible. At first, I tried to tell myself it was a one-time mistake, a lapse in judgment we could both move past. But every time I saw Liam, the memory of that kiss hung between us, thick and undeniable. And then it happened again. A few nights later, I was in the kitchen, washing dishes after dinner, when Liam walked in. "Need help?" he asked, stepping up beside me. "I've got it," I said, avoiding his gaze. He didn't leave. Instead, he reached for the dish towel, starting to dry the plates I handed him. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said suddenly, his voice barely a whisper. I froze, my hands submerged in soapy water. "Liam," I said, my voice shaking. "You can't tell me you don't feel it too," he interrupted, his eyes searching mine. I turned to face him, my heart hammering against my ribs. "This isn't about what I feel. It's about what's right." "And what if this is what's right?" he asked, stepping closer. His words shattered something inside me. Before I knew it, he was kissing me again, his hand sliding to my waist, pressing me against the cool granite countertop. This time, I didn't stop him. From that night on, we stopped fighting it. Our affair became a series of stolen moments, late nights in the living room after Mark was asleep, quiet mornings in the kitchen before he woke up, even fleeting touches as we passed in the hallway, a silent language only we understood. It was reckless, impulsive, dangerous. But in those moments, nothing else mattered. Liam made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. He saw me, not as a stepmother, not as a wife, but as a woman. But with the passion came the guilt, a constant gnawing ache. Every time I looked at Mark, I felt the weight of my betrayal crushing me. He trusted me, implicitly, and I was shattering that trust in the worst possible way. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to stop. The more time I spent with Liam, the harder it became to pull away. The way he looked at me, the way he touched me, it was addictive, a drug I couldn't quit, no matter how much I hated myself for it. I knew we were playing with fire, and it was only a matter of time before everything went up in flames. Once we crossed that line, there was no turning back. Liam and I fell into a twisted kind of rhythm. Our encounters were a chaotic blend of passion and stolen moments, snatched in the spaces between our shared lives. Every time I swore it would be the last time, something would pull us back together. A glance, a lingering touch, the unbearable magnetism of his presence in the same room. It wasn't just physical. That's what terrified me most. One night, while Mark was on yet another business trip, Liam and I stayed late at work. It felt safer there, away from the brownstone, its walls holding Mark's unseen presence even when he was miles away. The office was quiet, most of the team long gone for the night. I was in my office, reviewing a project proposal, when Liam knocked softly on the door and stepped inside. "You're still here," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "So are you," I replied, glancing up. "I couldn't leave without seeing you," he said, his voice soft. Something about the way he said it, so matter-of-fact, so sincere, made my breath catch. He walked over to my desk, his hand brushing mine as he placed a folder in front of me. "This is the updated concept art for the campaign," he said, though his tone made it clear the project was the furthest thing from his mind. "Thanks," I murmured, not trusting myself to say more. We stood there in silence for a moment, the air thick with unspoken words. Finally, he reached out, his fingers lightly brushing my cheek. "You look tired," he said softly. "I am," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. Before I could stop myself, I leaned into his touch, my eyes fluttering shut, and then he kissed me. That night, we didn't leave the office until the early hours of the morning. We stayed in my office, tangled together on the small couch by the window, the city lights painting shadows on the walls. It was reckless, insane. But for those few hours, the rest of the world ceased to exist. The next day at work, I avoided Liam. The weight of what we'd done pressed down on me like a physical burden. But later that evening, when I got home, I found him waiting for me in the kitchen. "You don't regret it, do you?" he asked, his voice tentative. I hesitated, my mind a chaotic storm. "Liam, this isn't simple." "It doesn't have to be," he said, stepping closer. "We just have to be honest with each other." "Honesty doesn't make this right," I said, though my resolve was already crumbling. "I don't care about right," he said, his hand reaching for mine. "I care about you." From that point on, we stopped pretending to resist. Our stolen moments became more frequent, more intense, more brazen. We found places to be alone. My office after hours, the empty guest room when Mark was away, even the back seat of my car on one particularly desperate night. Every time I told myself it was the last time, and every time I went back to him. One afternoon, while Mark was working in his home office, Liam and I found ourselves alone in the laundry room again. I was folding a basket of clothes, trying to focus on the mundane task and not the way Liam was watching me from the doorway. "Need help?" he asked, his voice a low tease. I shook my head, forcing a laugh. "I think I've got it." He stepped closer, his presence making the small room feel suffocating. "You work too hard," he murmured, his hand brushing mine as he reached for a towel. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs as he leaned in, his lips brushing against my ear. "Liam," I whispered, my voice trembling. "He won't hear us," he murmured, his hand sliding to my waist. "He's upstairs." I should have pushed him away, but instead, I let myself melt into him, the rest of the world fading away. As intoxicating as our affair was, it wasn't without its complications. At work, my assistant Sarah started to notice the way Liam and I interacted. She never said anything directly, but her knowing glances and raised eyebrows spoke volumes. "You've been spending a lot of time with Liam lately," she said one afternoon, her tone carefully neutral. "We're working on the same project," I said quickly, avoiding her gaze. "Uh-huh," she said, her expression unreadable. "Just be careful, Ava. People talk." Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I brushed them off. At home, the tension between Liam and Mark was becoming a thick, suffocating fog. Mark, bless his oblivious heart, didn't seem to suspect a thing. But Liam's growing confidence, his barely contained desire, made it harder to maintain the charade. He started lingering in the kitchen longer during family dinners, his eyes holding mine just a beat too long when Mark wasn't looking. One night, as Mark poured himself a scotch in the living room, Liam reached out under the table, his hand brushing against my thigh. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat, but I didn't pull away. The breaking point detonated on a Saturday morning. Mark was supposed to be at a client meeting downtown, but his plans shifted, and he came home early. I was in my bedroom with Liam, the door slightly ajar, when I heard the front door open downstairs. "Eva?" Mark called out, his voice echoing up the staircase. Liam and I froze, every nerve in my body screaming. Panic flared in his eyes. "You need to go," I whispered, pushing him towards the bathroom. Before he could move, Mark appeared in the doorway. For a split second, the three of us just stood there, frozen, the weight of our tangled lives crashing down around us. "Mark, I began, but he held up a hand, stopping me. His expression was a mask of disbelief and fury. "Don't," he said, his voice shaking. "I don't want to hear it." That night, I knew everything was about to shatter. The moment Mark walked into the bedroom doorway, time seemed to warp and distort, stretching into an agonizing eternity. His gaze flicked between Liam and me, his face a canvas of disbelief and rage. My chest tightened, constricting around my lungs as I desperately searched for words, any words, to explain the impossible. But there were none. No explanation could soften the brutal reality of what he had just witnessed. Liam stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of futile calm. "Dad, I can explain." "Explain?" Mark's voice sliced through the room, sharp and cold. "Explain what, Liam? That you've been sneaking around with my wife? That you've been sleeping with her under my own roof?" I flinched at his words, raw and brutal in their honesty. They were true. There was no way to sugarcoat it, no way to soften the blow. "Mark, please," I started again, but he rounded on me, his anger now a palpable thing. "Don't," he snapped, his face flushed crimson with rage. "Don't you dare try to justify this, Ava. You betrayed me, both of you." The bedroom felt impossibly small, the air suffocating. Liam tried to speak again, his jaw tight, but Mark cut him off, his voice trembling with a mixture of fury and heartbreak. "You don't get to talk," he said, his eyes locking on Liam. "You're my son, Liam, my son." "How could you do this?" Liam's jaw tightened further, and for the first time, the shy, uncertain boy I'd known seemed to vanish, replaced by something harder, more resolute. "Because I love her," he said, his voice steady, unwavering. The silence that followed was deafening, heavy with unspoken pain and betrayal. Mark stared at him, his face a mask of disbelief and raw pain. "You love her?" he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes," Liam said firmly, "and I'm not going to apologize for it." His words hung in the air, a defiant challenge. For a terrifying moment, I thought Mark might strike him. But instead, he took a step back, his shoulders slumping as the full weight of Liam's confession seemed to crush him. "I want you both out," he said finally, his voice hollow, devoid of emotion. "I don't care where you go, but you're not staying here." That night, I packed a suitcase in silence, my hands shaking as I folded clothes, the mundane actions a stark contrast to the chaos tearing through my life. Liam hovered in the doorway, watching me, his expression a complex mix of concern and fierce determination. "You don't have to do this alone," he said softly. I didn't look at him. "Liam, this is my mess to clean up." "It's not just your mess," he insisted, stepping into the room. "We're in this together." I turned to face him then, my eyes stinging with tears. "Don't you see what we've done? We've destroyed everything. Your father, our family, my career." "I don't care about any of that," he said, his voice breaking. "I care about you." His words pierced through the layers of guilt, a sharp pang of something that felt dangerously like hope, but it wasn't enough. It couldn't be. "You deserve more than this," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "More than me." He opened his mouth to argue, to protest, but I shook my head, cutting him off. "Please, Liam, let me do this on my own." By the time I left the brownstone, the house was silent, tomb-like. Mark had retreated into his study, the door slammed shut. Liam stood in the driveway, watching as I climbed into my car. As I pulled away from the curb, I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was still standing there, a lone figure on the sidewalk, growing smaller and smaller until he vanished completely from view. I checked into a budget motel on the edge of the city that night, the weight of everything collapsing around me. The moment I closed the door behind me, the flimsy veneer of control I'd been clinging to shattered. I sank onto the edge of the cheap mattress, staring blankly at the muted television screen, my mind a frantic carousel of guilt, regret, and a strange, unwelcome ache of loss. The next morning, I called Sarah, my assistant, and told her I wouldn't be coming into the office. "I figured as much," she said, her tone cautious, laced with a hint of knowing pity. "Ava, is everything okay?" "No," I admitted, my voice trembling. "But I'll figure it out." The fallout arrived faster than I anticipated. 2 days after I left the brownstone, an email landed in my inbox from HR. Someone, likely Jessica from accounting, the office gossip queen who always seemed to be watching me a little too closely, had reported my inappropriate relationship with Liam. The email stated that an official investigation would be launched immediately. I knew exactly where that would lead. I didn't wait for the inevitable. I resigned that same day, sending a curt email to HR copying my supervisor, a man who suddenly wouldn't return my calls. By the end of the week, my career, the carefully constructed edifice of my professional life, was in ruins. Liam called me that night, his voice heavy with concern. "Where are you?" he asked, a desperate urgency in his tone. "It doesn't matter," I said, staring out the grimy motel window at the anonymous highway stretching into the darkness. "It matters to me," he said firmly. "Ava, I don't care about the fallout. I don't care about the job or the house or anything else. I just want to know you're okay." "I'm fine," I lied, the word a hollow echo in the sterile motel room. "You're not," he said quietly, his voice laced with a pain that mirrored my own. "But we can figure this out. Together. Please, just tell me where you are." For a moment, I wavered, the desperate longing to hear his voice, to feel his arms around me, almost overwhelming. I wanted to surrender to the illusion, to pretend, even for a fleeting moment, that everything could somehow be salvaged. But I couldn't. I wouldn't drag him further down with me. "I'm sorry, Liam," I said, my voice breaking, the words tearing at my throat. "But this is where it ends." "Ava." I hung up before he could say anything else, tears streaming down my face as I fumbled to turn off my phone, severing the last fragile thread connecting us. The next day, I drove to a scenic overlook on the outskirts of town, a quiet spot perched high above the city. I parked the car, got out, and stood at the edge, staring out at the endless horizon. I thought about everything we'd shared, every stolen moment, every whispered confession, every reckless decision that had led us to this precipice. I didn't regret loving him, not really, but I regretted the devastating cost of that love, the wreckage we had left in our wake. It's been 3 months since I walked away from everything. The motel was a temporary purgatory. After a few weeks of staring at blank walls and subsisting on lukewarm coffee, I rented a small apartment on the other side of the city. A modest one-bedroom, functional, anonymous, with just enough space to breathe, to pretend I could start over. The walls are bare, painted a sterile white. The furniture is sparse, utilitarian, but it's quiet. And for now, that's enough. I haven't heard from Mark. I didn't expect to. The last time I saw him, his eyes burned with a raw, incandescent pain. A betrayal so profound I doubted forgiveness was even remotely possible. I hadn't bothered trying to explain myself. What was there to say? What I did was unforgivable. As for Liam, I've tried to banish him from my thoughts, to build walls around my memories, but it's a futile exercise. He's a ghost in the corners of my mind, a phantom limb I can still feel aching with longing. About a month after I moved into the apartment, I saw him. It was a Saturday afternoon, late autumn air, crisp and cold, and I was sitting at a small cafe downtown, nursing a lukewarm coffee, scrolling mindlessly through emails, trying to distract myself with the mundane. I looked up, drawn by some unseen force, and there he was. Standing on the other side of the street, amidst the bustling city crowd, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his expression unreadable, shadowed by the brim of a baseball cap. For a fraction of a second, our eyes met, locked across the distance, and my breath hitched in my throat. He looked the same, and yet different, harder, maybe, more self-contained, more sure of himself. He didn't cross the street. He didn't wave. He just stood there for a few moments, watching me, a silent question hanging in the air between us, waiting for some kind of sign. But I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just sat there, frozen, trapped in the amber of that moment. Eventually, slowly, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the anonymous flow of city life, swallowed by the crowd. That was the last time I saw him. I heard, through a mutual acquaintance at the office, that Liam had quit his internship shortly after I left the company. No one knew where he went, and I haven't tried to find out. It's better this way, for both of us. Some days I wonder if he thinks about me as often as I think about him. I wonder if he's angry with me for the way I ended things, for pushing him away, for what must have felt like abandoning him to face the fallout alone. But I know, deep down, it was the only choice I could make. He deserved a future, a life unburdened by the tangled wreckage we had created. As for me, I'm learning to rebuild, piece by piece, from the ruins. I've started freelancing, taking on small creative projects, design gigs, marketing copy, anything to keep me busy, to keep the silence at bay. It's not the career I had, the demanding, high-powered life I once led, but it's something. A quiet, steady hum of purpose in the quiet of my new life. A small, persistent reminder that I'm still capable of creating, of contributing, even in this diminished version of myself. Most mornings, I wake up early, before the city truly stirs, brew a pot of strong coffee, and sit by the window in my apartment, watching the dawn break over the skyline, painting the steel and glass in hues of pale gold and rose. It's not much, but it's peaceful. And in the vast, echoing silence of my solitude, I've started to understand that peace, in its own quiet way, can be a kind of solace. I've stopped waiting for closure. I've realized it will never come, not in the neatly packaged Hollywood ending I once naively imagined. What Liam and I shared was reckless, flawed, morally compromised, a wildfire that burned everything in its path. But it was also real, undeniably, irrevocably real. And even though it ended in ashes, in heartbreak and ruin, I can't bring myself to regret the incandescent way he made me feel, the spark of life he ignited in the long, slow fade of my carefully constructed existence. Last night, rummaging through a box of forgotten things, I found one of his hoodies, a soft, worn cotton thing, tucked into the back of a drawer. A ghost of our past, a remnant of the life we almost built, the life that could never be. I held it for a long time, pressing it to my face, breathing in the faint, lingering scent of him, a ghost of sandalwood and something else, something uniquely, achingly Liam, and for the first time in months, the dam finally broke. I let myself cry, not out of guilt, not out of shame, but for the love I had to let go of, for the future that vanished in the flames. When I finally folded the hoodie and placed it back in the drawer, a strange, unexpected calm settled over me. The chapter is closed, the story is over, but a part of me, a hidden, indelible part, will always carry him with me, a secret weight in my heart, no matter where life takes us from here.